and welcome. You're watching a very special show with regards to the Putin and Trump meeting that is likely to take place in the next 48 hours. I'm Gauri Dwivedi. In the next 30 minutes, we get you all the scenarios, the possibilities that lie ahead, and including the fact that is there a deal on the table that could potentially end the biggest conflict that Europe has been embroiled in since the Second World War. Now, viewers, just days before Putin and Trump meeting is set to take place in Alaska, Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov and US Secretary of State Rubio have spoken in terms of the final preparations. Remember, this comes after the first meeting that took place between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin during Trump's first term. That took place in Helsinki. This time around, it is in Alaska. The grinding war has now taken a whole new dimension and a different turn, with several military wins that Putin has been able to register, even as there is now growing consensus amongst the Western world that more needs to be done to end this war. Donald Trump himself has done a bit of a seesaw and a huge swing in terms of, I don't want Vladimir Putin and me to not have any possibility of a third negotiator. He also had Zelensky being thrown out of the Oval Office, to the other extreme where Donald Trump has actually said that he will in fact arm Ukraine with Patriot missiles and in fact double down as far as sanctions are concerned. Which way is this likely to go? Could there potentially be some sort of a ceasefire, or should we actually now temper our expectations in terms of little outcomes could actually come out of this summit? Are some of the points that we will try and get you details of. But first up, let's quickly now play out that soundbite of Donald Trump where he said that it's going to take him just a couple of minutes to really understand whether the proposed meeting with Putin is actually going to lead to some answers or solutions or not. Listen in.
I expect to have a meeting with Putin that I think it'll be good, but it might be bad. And I'm here for one reason, to get rid of a war that somebody else started. Should have never happened. And if I could end it, great. Well, we're going to have a meeting with Vladimir Putin, and at the end of that meeting, probably in the first 2 minutes, I'll know exactly whether or not a deal can be made.
How will you know that?
Because that's what I do. I make deals.
Stakes are high, expectations are low. Russia is not letting its guard down. Instead, it's launching in fresh offensive in eastern Ukraine, pushing in as far as the Donetsk region is concerned. The breach exposes issues in the Ukrainian army, while President Zelensky said the new assault shows that Russia is not seeking an end to hostilities. Yet, dealmaker President Donald Trump is confident, saying that in just a couple of minutes, he could actually see through Putin. You heard that bite of Donald Trump. Let's also now play out the other side, Ukraine. Well, it is really the other side, except that it's not on the table. So far, it's going to be only about Trump and Putin, except that the territory that they're talking about is that of Ukraine. Let's play out the Ukraine Foreign Minister for you.
Позиція України залишається незмінною. Нічого про Україну без України, нічого про Європу без Європи. Висновки мають бути зроблені, ніяких винагород, подарунків чи умиротворення агресора. Кожна поступка агресору провокує подальшу агресію. Мир через силу – єдиний ефективний підхід до переговорів з Росією.
All right, viewers, before we get into the details of what possibly could be expected at this meeting, less than 3 days to go, I want to first tell you about Alaska. Why is it that glacial Alaska, icy Alaska, is the choice of venue for Friday's meeting? Why is it that this is where the two sides are going to meet to potentially thrash out some sort of a solution? First and foremost, this is 55 miles from Russian territory. So essentially as close as it gets in terms of being near the American territory. First, the second part is the Beranger land bridge. It was a huge land bridge which once connected America and Russia via Alaska. So there is a certain geographical significance to it. But let's now come to the other geopolitical significance of this, which is it underscores the proximity that exists between US and America. So there's a certain geographic proximity. A lot of Alaska actually has Russian Orthodox churches also in terms of its skyline. And that tells you a certain historical connect between the two sides. It also offers some sort of a semi-neutral middle point for Putin and Trump. It is semi-neutral simply because this is where there is some sort of, as I said, a historical connect, a cultural bridge, so to say, between the two sides. Russia and the US also in this area directly face each other off across the Arctic theater. So every time one talks about where is it that they are really facing off, it is here. In fact, it was in this region, in Alaska, where when the Cold War was taking place, it was actually the most heavily surveilled place on Earth. This is where they actually face each other off. Lastly, 1867, a bit of history here for you viewers. It was Tsar Alexander II who sold Alaska off to the US for $7.2 million value in gold. So this is the certain historical context to it, a certain cultural and historical significance to the venue. But one thing I want to say before I get the big questions up here, viewers, which is that we're telling about history, but the future will be decided by what that meeting really unfolds. We've spoken a lot about going all the way back to 1867, but from 2025 onwards, which way the world will go, which way the Russia-US relationship will go, will be determined exactly by that meeting. Let's put up now the big questions that we are putting forth, and then we get in our panel of experts to talk more on that. First and foremost, is it really a 4-0 op, or can you actually expect some sort of a real breakthrough here? Donald Trump has been seeking this meeting for a while. Could he just be happy with the fact that there is actually a meeting, or should we expect a breakthrough? Next up, this is the most important question, viewers. Will Vladimir Putin make any concessions? He has so far said no. Also, very important to point out that the peace formula that the two leaders will actually decide will be the one that has been proposed by Vladimir Putin, has been proposed by Russia. And that is extremely important because that is the starting point of the discussions. Will he agree on any concessions there? That is a billion-dollar question, isn't it? Will the meeting lead to relief for India's oil tariffs? All along, we've been saying here at NDTV, viewers, that the Russian oil sanctions have absolutely nothing to do with India importing oil from Russia. China imports far more, so does the EU. It has got to do with Donald Trump's frustration that he's not been able to end the war. A breakthrough could potentially lead to some sort of a relief there. And what is the best case scenario here? What could possibly be the best outcome here? A ceasefire, potentially leading to some cessation of hostilities, or some sort of a political resolution that could be more long-term in nature. What's the best case scenario? And lastly, let's put that out before we get in our guests. Will Zelensky in Europe accept the results of the meeting? Remember, they're a footnote. They're not part of any of these meetings. They have been desperate to get part of these, but they've been told in no uncertain terms that this is just a conversation and a dialogue between two leaders, even though, as I said, the territory that they're deciding on is of Europe. So will they accept what is actually decided in that meeting? Let's quickly now get in our guest joining us this evening, Fred Weyer, who's a senior journalist joining me from Russia, Professor Scott Lucas, and we also have Mr. Blank joining us for more on this. All right, in fact, Professor Lucas, let me start with you first. In terms of this meeting, some would say that the first thing we need to do is temper our expectations because there is just no meeting point given the completely divergent points at which the two sides actually exist.
Well, I think the best way to do this is to set out, as you have started to do, why this meeting's occurring and what the terms of the meeting will be. First, the reason why the meeting is occurring, and this is the Kremlin's last card to play with Donald Trump. They gave him the phone calls. They've given him the flattery. They didn't want to give him the face-to-face until they thought they were close to victory over Ukraine. The problem here is that Trump was threatening sanctions on Russia and on its trading partners, including India. So they've been on a bit of the defensive. They haven't made a big breakthrough in the East. The economy is flatlining. So this is the time they're going to try not only to push the sanctions back, but to try to roll Trump into, and this is the second point, presenting their ultimata to Ukraine. This is not a negotiation. This is not a compromise. It is known, because the terms have been put out, that Russia, at a minimum, is going to demand all of Donetsk and Luhansk in eastern Ukraine, even though they don't control part of the territory. They are going to demand at least the territory they hold in the south, in the Zaporizhia and Kherson regions, and possibly more. as well as, of course, Crimea, which they illegally took in 2014. They are going to ask for relief of sanctions on Moscow, and they're going to ask for a weak, demilitarized Ukraine with no security guarantees meaningfully from the West. We
Okay.
know that's what they're going to do because their officials have put it out.
This is so far-fetched that there is absolutely no way that there'll be any breaking of ice, so to say, at the glacial summit. And let me take that to Mr. Blank.
Yes, Professor Hita is absolutely right. This is basically just going to be a meeting in which Vladimir Putin tries to roll Donald Trump, and he may well succeed because Trump has been Putin's foremost international advocate for more than 20 years. And the fact that Ukraine is not even at the table shows that this is in no way any sort of meaningful negotiation. It's just trying to see whether there will be a united front between the aggressor, Vladimir Putin, and the world's foremost superpower, the United States.
Fred, then let me bring you in. What is Moscow thinking right now, walking into this meeting in less than 3 days? What is it that Vladimir Putin is hoping to achieve out of this?
I think there's a great deal of confusion in Moscow about what might be achieved by this. I don't think they agreed to it because of the sanctions threats. There's very little trade between the United States and Russia, so that's not a big stick. And it also occurs after countries like India and Brazil have rejected the sanctions threat from the United States. So I think that's not a factor in Moscow's thinking. I do think they want to pursue a more normalized relationship with the United States. I think there's something brewing about the Arctic. The Arctic cooperation is a big item, and that helps inform the choice of Alaska.
Do you think it's essentially going to be about a US-Russia relationship and not so much about finding a solution to the war?
I think that the terms that have been laid out, and Professor Lucas summarized them, are Russia's fundamental war goals. They've been fighting for well over 3 years. You know, you say what you like, but they've been fighting and they continue to fight and they're gaining ground. And these are their objectives. I don't think Putin is going to compromise on them. And if the summit fails, he'll just continue his offensive.
Mm-hmm. Indeed. One last question I want to take to Mr. Blank before I get viewers about the possible outcomes and possible scenarios that we could actually look at. But Mr. Blank, let me then ask you this the same question, which is that, is this largely going to be about Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin probably looking to take off from where they left the first time they met in Helsinki?
Well, yes, every discussion with Donald Trump is about Donald Trump. And his relationship with Vladimir Putin is one of the big mysteries of international relations, because nobody has really explained the exceptional solicitousness with which Mr. Trump approaches Mr. Putin. Donald Trump does not care about the outlines of a deal in Ukraine. He just wants a deal to exist, and he wants the headline of him having forged it. But that's an unrealistic outcome because Ukraine is not at the table. Any relationship between Ukraine and Russia has to come from negotiations between Ukraine and Russia. So what we'll see is a lot of ego fluffing, a lot of backpedaling, but we're not going to see a genuine Ukraine deal.
All right. Well, what's really a genuine Ukraine deal itself is now a matter of a lot of discussion. In fact, viewers, let me now tell you in terms of what could be the potential scenarios and possible outcomes that may actually come out of this meeting. Even if we temper our expectations, let's cover the whole gamut from absolutely nothing to maybe a big breakthrough. So first scenario that could actually come out of it is that they agree to a phased truce and some sort of a land swap that could take place in Ukraine. And this could be monitored, international buffer zones that could be created. Who will create them? Who will monitor them? Will they actually be followed? Is a separate question altogether, but this is a potential scenario where Zelensky resists any of these terms, conceding land to Russia. They've said that again. Zelensky is backed by the whole of EU and the whole of NATO, saying that there will not be any land concessions, because that's what Ukraine has been fighting for and has been holding ground for the last 3.5 years. So this is the first scenario that could possibly come in. Let's tell you the second one, which is a temporary freeze in war as deal is negotiated. Essentially a cessation of hostilities. There could be some prisoner swaps that could take place. But the challenge that could really be here in terms of seen as rewarding aggression, or you could say actually favoring Russia, because Russia is also happy if it's a cessation of hostilities rather than conceding any potential concession to Ukraine. Third possible outcome or scenario could be that Trump offers sanctions relief for de-escalation. Now, again, something that has very little effect, simply because US and Russia do not have that level of great economic exchange that this could actually have an impact. And also, the Russian war machine has said in the last 3.5 years that it's been able to function no matter how many secondary and third sanctions that they keep imposing. The last scenario that I want to put out is, viewers, which is that talks fail as Trump and Putin refuse to make any concessions. As I said, we covered the entire gamut, with scenario 1 being the West, scenario 4 saying that they exit and the war continues. Which way it will be remains to be seen. But, that's a question I throw open to the entire panel, which is that which of these 4 outcomes in your assessment actually looks the most likely? Professor Lucas.
Look, there will be no scenario in which Russia compromises. We need to be clear. Fred Weir has just made that clear. There will be some token US-Russia relations, we're getting along so well, in which the Russians are implicitly saying, since we're getting along so well, say over the Arctic, why aren't you backing us over Ukraine? Instead, you need to go to, if there are no concessions made, and if Russia continues the attacks from the land and the air, which have frustrated Donald Trump, what happens next? And I think that brings in 2 scenarios which are important to add to what you're talking about. The first scenario is that it does bring back in the possibility of crippling sanctions. There's a misunderstanding here. The reason why the US sanctions, toughened US sanctions, are worrying the Russians is not because of US-Russian trade. It's because of the effect that it has with Russia's trade with India, with China, and with other trading partners,
right,
especially the sales of Russian oil. And the second scenario is, and this is the fundamental, Ukraine and Europe are not on the side of this. Ukraine and Europe have been maneuvering all week, and they'll come back with the fundamental, which is a 30-day ceasefire in the air, on land, unconditional. Now let's talk about that.
Yeah, and with some sort of a prisoner swap and more negotiations to continue. I think that's probably what it will be. Could that, Fred, lead to some sort of cooling off in terms of both sides, and also cooling off in terms of how Donald Trump is going after India with regard to the Russian oil sanctions?
I think we don't know what the Americans and Russians have agreed under the table. They've talked a lot. There clearly was some kind of a deal made between Witkoff and Putin last week on the very day that Trump threatened to bring down heavy sanctions on Russia. He instead announced the summit. Somewhere in that, there must be reasons that both sides have for calling this summit, and we'll have to wait for that to unfold. But of course, I don't think, even if they come out announcing some sort of an agreement about Ukraine, swaps and so on, I don't think that's going to be accepted by Ukraine or Europe, and therefore we will have a continuation of this crisis.
Mr. Blank, then are we just looking at just a lot of optics here? Is that what we're really looking at? And does that mean that Ukraine will have to be continued? You've got to continue funding it, supporting it. And is EU and US prepared to do that?
On the first question, yes. On the second question, we'll see. I agree with Professors Lucas and Weir. What we are looking at really is an attempt by Putin to essentially hoodwink Trump into supporting his position, and he may well succeed. Will that result in any meaningful change? No, it will not. Might there be an optical change? There could be, because Vladimir Putin's modus operandi is to take everything he can and then negotiate for what pieces he may choose to give back. And at least so far, Ukraine has been unwilling to accept that terrible proposition.
Okay, which brings me to ask my final question to all three of you, but very quickly, sir, I'm running out of time, and that seems to be the situation as far as this war is also concerned. Professor Lucas, assuming that the summit fails, assuming it leads to limited to no outcomes whatsoever, do you expect the war to continue in its present form, or do you expect Trump administration to probably come up with new ways to probably target Russia or vent out his frustration, for want of a better word?
The significance of the Trump administration is not Donald Trump. It's whether other officials continue to work with Ukraine and Europe to provide the military and financial support that's needed to resist this invasion. Because Russia has maybe a 6 to 12 month window to try to seize more territory before the economic squeeze tightens.
Okay.
The GDP is flatlining. The government budget is getting worse.
I would have
Putin
agreed
is
with
going
you,
to have to
except
move
that I
quickly.
heard this 3 years back as well, and have been continuing to hear
not it.
that. So I take what you say with a pinch of salt.
That's not exactly what we're saying. We're not talking about a collapse of the Russian economy. We're talking about the ability of a wartime economy after 41 and a half months to keep prosecuting the war.
Fred, do you
and
think
Russia is constrained.
Okay. Russia is constrained. It's got now running out of options in terms of how it wants to close this, but so is Ukraine. Fred, do you think so?
Yeah, the Russian economy is slowing down. There's much public talk about it among Russians, but it's in no way going to affect the war effort if that is the political will in the Kremlin, and nobody should delude themselves into thinking that it will. Otherwise, if the summit fails, I do expect the war to continue. The Russians are making progress on the battlefield. Their advances are speeding up, and they fully believe that they will win the war, negotiations or no.
All right. Jonah Blank, I really have 30 seconds. Quick closing comments. You want to say anything that we haven't covered so far?
Yes. I think the important thing is to remember that the Ukrainians are not represented here, and they are one of the two parties. It really is all going to come down to the extent to which the Ukrainian people are willing to continue this fight.
Okay, let's see who really has the cards here. Donald Trump, of course, likes to keep all the cards to himself. Does he have those cards here is probably $1 million question in itself. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining me on this very special broadcast. Well, viewers, what one can say is that only three things here. Is it possible that Vladimir Putin has got first mover advantage by getting to offer his peace plan first? Is it possible that the real game plan is just to get the relationship back between US and Russia, with the war likely to at best see cessation of hostilities? Could there be just a secret communique like last time, with nobody really knowing what the two leaders really spoke about? And lastly, the Kremlin's army is continuing to make advances deeper and deeper into Ukraine at a great cost, of course, but continues to bombard Ukrainian cities. So there is a Russian military assault that continues, and it's making wins. In the backdrop of that, your guess is as good as mine as to whether the glacial summit could actually lead to any outcomes. Thank you so much for watching this special broadcast. We slip into a short break. We come back with more news and updates on the other side. Stay with us.